Two questions, isn't it,
Yes,
John? Is this product actually eaten, swallowed?
Well, that's a very interesting question. You know, it really is. Let's say that sometimes it is, and ultimately it finds its way into the stomach, I imagine. And, you know, if you use it that way, one ultimately... Well, I want to be as helpful as I can, Miss Burnett.
I don't mean their jobs. I mean their estate.
Their estate or status. Well, I would say that it is possible that as a ramification, if not necessarily a first result of Mr. Stone's services, there might be a change in estate, station, or condition, shall we say.
Very generous. Because if it doesn't hold, I thought it might be used in extraordinary cases in prisons as contrasted with routine.
Well, we mean that this is used in the routine of conducting the affairs of any establishment whose sole purpose is the restraining of an individual for the commission of some crime against society.
If you bought it in a department store, would it be at a ground floor counter, possibly?
Yes.
Or the basement?
It could be. Actually, the design of the department store here would come into account, but we could presume that there would be a counter in the first floor of a department store that, under certain circumstances and conditions, might well have a counter upon which they would repose this article we have in mind.
Take back the question.
Is that sentence finished, John?
Yeah, it's all finished.
One of the longest sentences anybody served since Al Capone.
To improve them in any way? That's a very interesting question. We'll have a small conference, if you don't mind. Cooking chat, too, don't you think? So, we'll give you a qualified yes. Actually, it could improve them in some way. It would depend, certainly, to some degree upon a subjective interpretation of the form and nature of the service and the specific circumstances under which it was taken. All right, Mr. Ellis.
That goes without saying.
In other words, she would have some need for it, or she wouldn't go out and buy it.
I would say there would be a necessity for its use if it were in relation to a member of your sex, yes. I mean, if she were associated with it, it would be necessary that it be there to be applied in the context of her potential use of it.
Well, then, is there some product that you must have in order to do your work?
No, ma'am.
There is nothing...
Well, I would say this, that we are now in such a broad area of questioning that whereas we have a specific definition for product, in this case we would, I think, grant you a partial yes to the question with the understanding that there is a physical entity necessary.
I wish I hadn't asked it.
There would be no meat products at all?
Well, this is a very... Actually, I think we'll give you a no on that, mostly because your premise is wrong. That makes it 3 down and 7 to go, Miss Kilgallen.
Could you give me a synopsis of Bennett's premise, please?
He assumed something that has not yet been tangibly set down as a viable premise for discussion.
Well, I'll
taking,
just
shall
skip
we
it.
say, one very minor part of the discussion, he assumed that something existed or was in being that in fact is not in being, per se.
Shocking. When it is found in the house, after she has done whatever it is that she does to it, is it then not edible?
After she has done what she does to it. After Mrs. Wirtz has done what she does to it and you find it in the house, it would not then, in that state and condition, bearing in mind the basic and relative association that Mrs. Wirtz has with it, be edible.
I'm glad.
Is it a piano that you're associated with in the public mind?
No. Small conference.
Small piano.
Now, I do think this, Mr. Cerf, there is a question here of identification in the public mind. However, it devolved originally upon the determination of a musical instrument with which at least our guest felt a closer, shall we say, affinity than just the mass of instruments. On that line of questioning, you got to the issue of the piano, and we sort of stuck you there. So we will tell you that basically the answer to your last question would be no on the identification in the public mind, but since it is the musical instrument in question, you proceed.
Well,
Is there any product connected with your work, Mrs. Foley?
No.
No, there is a product that is an end result, but her direct attachment thereto, or her functioning with relation thereto, is not so immediate as to define a product as a part of the glockenspiel. That's 1 down and 9 to go.
Well, Mr. Disney, do you touch any particular part of the people that come in contact with you?
You mean, does he specifically have to have a reference of the particular part of the anatomy of any human being that he comes in contact with, that part being to the exclusion of all other parts?
Had a little misunderstanding then. I understood Mrs. Monk to say it was used from the waist up and from the neck down.
Yes, but there was a specific application to that area of the corpus between the shoulders and the waistline, and the application directly thereto, which left us with at least a connotation that the chest, the back, the middle, the sides were being specifically spoken of, and in this context we could not give an affirmative reply.
I mean, you do not manipulate these people in any way. That's correct. Is that right?
The direct issue of manipulation in the terminology that usually applies in such instances would, I think, here get you a negative answer, but in an affirmative sense. Miss Arlene.
I'm just curious about why they haven't got any in Scotland.
Well, now, actually, I don't want to confuse you on this. With specific reference to the identification of the product with Mrs. Howie, it can be described as not sold in Scotland. This does not deny the premise that it might initially have been purveyed for some monetary consideration in Scotland at an earlier date.
Excuse me, John, may we have a conference?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Do any of you know what in the world he's talking about?
I heard him say something, but I don't understand a word he's saying.
I quite agree.
No. Perhaps you could put that into English for
What?
What I meant to say was that although with specific reference to Mrs. Howie's identification with this product, it can be described as not sold in Scotland, but this does not deny the possibility that at an earlier date it was purveyed for some monetary consideration.
Oh, I see. Oh, do I?
Thank you, John.
All righty.
Is it a domesticated animal?
Hey, this is rough, isn't it? Yeah. To the degree that domesticated means that it has learned or has been trained or by its natural condition and state can get along in a normal society without doing damage, destroying property, etc., we'd say it was domesticated.
I see. Is it something that some families get a new model every year?
I would say this, Fred. It's a difficult question to answer on an every-year basis, but it is reasonable to assume that since there is a change in pattern, as you have previously caused us to note, that many families might get new models as time went on.
John, you have the longest epigrams that I have ever heard.
Are you a special kind of pilot, Mr. Draper? Do you pilot a special type plane? Is that it?
Well, I will say that there is a special classification in a way, although it would not necessarily be within the framework or term of reference that applies to Air Force classifications of pilots. There is a special identification which is unique to Mr. Draper, yes.
I don't remember my question now.
Can both men and women participate in whatever it is you do?
They participate to the degree that this is a service which is meant to have wide distribution among the populace. Both men and women can participate in the service to the degree that they can share in its implementation.
Well, can he render his services to both sexes, is what I meant.
I think you might accurately say that in the performance of his service, it's his intent to render them to both sexes.
Kind of training, an apprenticeship.
No.
That's 2 down and 8 to go, Miss Kilgallen.
Well, you must need some little knack that you have, don't you, to be a success in it?
Well,
No?
let me answer this if I may. This is so general an area that I would just say that, to be successful or to achieve even a modicum of financial return,
I
one must
suppose
know
so.
how to conduct what activities one interests oneself in over any period of time.
Oh, you've done it again.
All right.
Do you have regular hours that you perform these services?
Right.
You have.
I would say this, if I may, to put it in the proper context in light of the answer that was given to Dorothy, that while Mr. Goldberg is from New York and may not be in New York to that degree, he has always, wherever he may go, a base of operations which may be described as an office and a working period which may be described as...
Do people in any way buy tickets in order to avail themselves of your services? No ticket? No ticky, no washi?
No, actually, I would say this, that it's reasonable to presume that our guest might appear by accident or design at some sort of an occasion which would require ticket-taking, but this does not necessarily mean that his presence would be requiring the ticket-taking, you see.
I don't know whether I got a yes, a no, or maybe, or how have you been?
Because that last thing threw me all off. Are you talking about he can appear somewhere as a speaker or something and people would buy tickets, or are you talking about his work? We're trying to find out his work.
I would say that in the pursuance of his normal occupation, it is possible that he might appear somewhere where the taking of tickets would be a natural concomitant of the holding of the general gathering.
Now, do you know what he means?
But not necessarily be...
Go on, Arlene. Well, is it enjoyed by anybody or anything?
You see, we have an unhappy verb here for clear definition with respect to what we're talking about, so that I can only say, although I myself am unfamiliar with this specifically, that I would presume that there's an element of enjoyment involved in contact.
I have a question. What did you just say?
Would this apply to specific things or persons rather than practically everybody, like toothpaste? I mean, is it unlike a general item like toothpaste?
Yes.
In other words, you have to be somebody or something special to want this or need it.
Now, you see what kind of a bear trap you got yourself into. Dorothy, I think that you will agree, if you get a no on the previous question as modified and asked again, that generally this has a very general application to the degree that it needs to be applied.
There you go.
Are you in the baby business?
We've talked this over, Jack, and we are both of very generous hearts. On the other hand, we feel we have a deep obligation not to confuse you. And since you have in this question raised an area where an affirmative answer could cause a great deal of confusion, to spare you the confusion, we'll give you a no. That makes it 3 down.
I want to compliment you. That speech was longer than Cinerama.
Well, when they leave you, do they feel better mentally and physically? Oh, yes.
I would be fair there and say, Miss Margaret, that the assumption is that they are relieved of some concern and therefore improved mentally, which by natural extension would yield, I imagine, some definite benefits physically, too.
I think we're talking to the wrong doctor.
Is it a personal kind of a service?
Well, I'd say it was pretty personal, yeah. It's a little hard, Bennett. I don't quite understand your term of reference. It's personal to the degree that there would have to be an area of identification, if not immediate contact, between Mrs. Cody and the recipients of the service if there was to be any satisfaction on either side.
I should never have pulled you out of that pool.
Is it, therefore, for the good of man?
Well, this is a very broad term that you've applied here, David. I would think that to the degree that you can assess the value that might obtain to the individual from the proper utilization of the service which is under discussion.
He's throwing you off.
We would have to agree that this was for the betterment of man to the degree that it improves a sense of well-being or is a receiving terminology for enjoyment of one kind or another.
Well, I can't even remember what I asked.
Mrs. Chapman, Are people better off after they have seen you as a rule? Do you help them in some way?
Yes, I think you help them. I think it's safe to say that Mrs. Chapman contributes in a measure to the well-being of those who choose to come to that area where her services may be performed, that in the satisfaction of the need, they do find a certain pleasure. Yes.
Do you want to do the second stanza, or should we just go? Do you work with Ivy Priest in any way?
No.
She's gone.
No. Where's she gone?
Real gone.
Well, let's have a conference.
She's the boss.
Secretary of the Treasury.
Do we know that he works in Cleveland?
I mean,
Arlene, we don't want to
Treasurer.
mislead you. We would have to agree, since you have already adduced that Mr. Brett has a relationship to the Treasury Department and albeit to the Mint itself, that there is a mutual affinity of employment here involving
Yes.
this
Oh,
splendid
yes.
Miss
Oh, I
Priest
feel
that
that.
we would
Oh,
have
yes,
to
John.
accept.
I'm with you. Yes, indeed. Yes.
So you may continue questioning.